Tēnā kahika o te nehe nui, tēnā rā tātou katoa. Nau mai, haere mai ki te whare o te reo irirangi o Maniapoto. Welcome to the special broadcast Tahua Pūtea, rua mano rua takau mā rua. Very shortly, we will cross live to Parliament to hear the budget being delivered by the Minister of Finance, Grant Robertson. And at the conclusion of his speech, we will filter key aspects of the well-being budget and share how it affects you. Whilst many may not find the kaupapa for today overly interesting, the budget, however, is very important in the respect that it outlines how much money the government expects to earn in the coming financial year and how it intends to spend it. The budget can include changes to government policy and will contain decisions that will impact every New Zealander. Very shortly at 2 o'clock, we're just moments away, the official ceremony or the official starting of today's proceedings will begin with the arrival of the Sergeant of Arms carrying the ceremonial mace. Shortly after that, the Speaker of the House will deliver the karakia before they move into the business of the day, essentially housekeeping of Parliament. It will include the presentation of petitions, papers and select committee reports, introduction of bills, and then we will hear the budget statement from the Minister of Finance. And so that's only moments away. And of course, we will cross live to Parliament and bring you all of the action and the latest from the budget 2022. Lots of anxiety, lots of expectations, lots of hope is expected from the announcement of Budget 2022. There have been some pre-budget announcements, such as a new Pūtea for 38,000 apprenticeships, Māori trades training, and mana and mahi. And you can absorb or utilise these opportunities whilst you earn. Taking a look now at what's happening at the House of Chambers in Parliament. And we have the arrival of the Sergeant at Arms. He'll be entering. Normally he enters the doorway on the right, at the top right-hand side of the screen. And the Sergeant of Arms is now entering the chamber, followed by the Speaker. So let's cross now live to Wellington, to Parliament, to take in the karakia from the Speaker of the House.
Kaha rawa ka tuku whakamoimati atu mātou mō ngā karakia, ko waihotia mai ki runga i a mātou. Ka waiho i o mātou, pānga whaiaro katoa ki te taha. Ka mihi mātou ki te koine me te inoi atu, o te ārhitanga i roto i o mātou whakaarorohanga. Kia mohi o ai, kia whakaiti ai tā mātou whakahaere i ngā take o te whare nei. O te oranga, te maunga rongo me te aroha o Aotearoa. Āmene.
Amen.
A petition has been presented to the clerk for presentation.
Petition of Barnabas Fund New Zealand requesting that the House urge the government to officially recognise as genocide the mass murder of Armenian, Assyrian, Syriac and Greek Christians in the Ottoman Empire.
That petition stands referred to the Petitions Committee. On the 17th of May, the Ministry for the Environment, Manatu Mō Te Tau, Aotearoa's New Zealand's first emissions reduction plan, together with the Aotearoa New Zealand's first emissions reduction plan table of actions, were presented. Those papers are published under the authority of the House. Select committee reports have been delivered for presentation.
Report of the Finance and Expenditure Committee on the Reserve Bank of New Zealand's Financial Stability Report, May 2022. Report of the Justice Committee on the petition of Carl Thomas. Reports of the Regulations Review Committee on the complaint about the Resource Management National Environmental Standards for Freshwater Regulations 2020 and on the examination of COVID-19 orders presented between 16 and 29 March 2022.
The reports of the Finance and Expenditure and Regulation Review Committees are set down for consideration. The clerk has been informed of the introduction of bills.
Appropriation 2021-22 Supplementary Estimates Bill, introduction. Repeal of Good Friday and Easter Sunday as restricted trading days, shop trading and sale of alcohol amendment bill, introduction. Electoral Strengthening Democracy Amendment Bill, introduction. Increased penalties for breach of biosecurity bill, introduction.
Those bills are set down for first reading.
Mr Speaker,
The Honourable Grant Robertson.
I present the supplementary estimates of appropriations for the Government of New Zealand for the year ending 30 June 2022.
That paper is published under the authority of the House. The House now comes to the delivery of the budget.
Mr Speaker,
The Honourable Grant Robertson.
I present the 2022 budget speech, the Budget at a Glance 2022, the Wellbeing Budget 2022, including reports on the fiscal strategy on child poverty and the summary of initiatives, the Budget Economic and Fiscal Update 2022, and the estimates of appropriations for the Government of New Zealand for the year ending 30 June 2023.
Those papers are published under the authority of the House.
Congratulations. Don't spend it all at once.
We've got extra stuff.
Enter.
Appropriation 2022-23 Estimates Bill, Introduction.
The Appropriation 2022-23 Estimates Bill is set down for first reading forthwith.
Mr Speaker,
The Honourable Grant Robertson.
I move that the Appropriation 2022-23 Estimates Bill be now read a first time.
The question is that the motion be agreed to. Those of that opinion will say aye. To the contrary, no. The ayes have it.
Appropriation 2022-23 Estimates Bill, first reading.
The Appropriation 2022-23 Estimates Bill is now set down for second reading forthwith.
Mr Speaker,
The Honourable Grant Robertson.
I move that the Appropriation 2022-23 Estimates Bill be now read a second time. It is my great pleasure to present New Zealand's fourth wellbeing budget. In each of this government's three previous wellbeing budgets, we've not only considered the performance of our economy and finances, but also the wellbeing of our people, the health of our environment, and the strength of our communities. In Budget 2020 and 2021, we applied that wellbeing approach to dealing with COVID-19. This meant taking a health and science-led approach, focusing on caring for our people and our communities. It has meant that New Zealand has reached this stage of the pandemic in as good a position as any other country. Mr Speaker, that is not just because we have one of the lowest death rates from COVID, but also because our economy is in a stronger position than most. This has been recognised by 2 AAA credit ratings from leading ratings agencies and by the likes of the OECD and the IMF. It has been a tough couple of years for New Zealanders. I want to again thank businesses, workers and all members of our community for your hard work. It means we are now in a strong position to meet the next set of challenges and take the new opportunities to provide all New Zealanders with economic security in good times and in bad. The investments we are making in this budget build on the progress we made in Budget 2021 towards the government's 3 goals for this term. These are continuing to keep New Zealanders safe from COVID-19, accelerating the recovery and the rebuild from the impacts of COVID-19, and laying the foundations for the future, including addressing key issues such as climate change, housing affordability, and child poverty. Budget 2022 invests $5.9 billion a year in net new operating spending, while introducing multi-year funding packages that also draw from Budget 2023 and Budget 2024 operating allowances.
We're investing $2.9 billion from the Climate Emergency Response Fund to meet our emissions reduction plan and lay the foundations for a long-term transition to a low-emissions, high-wage economy. And, Mr Speaker, we are also supporting New Zealanders to meet the rising cost of living caused by global inflation pressures through a targeted package of support focusing on low and middle income New Zealanders, including a short-term cost of living payment for around 2.1 million people. Mr Speaker, New Zealand's overall well-being has held up well during the COVID pandemic. Our mortality rate remains lower than those of our international peers, and life satisfaction remains high across all ethnicities. While the economic contraction associated with COVID-19 was much deeper and much more sudden than what New Zealand experienced during the global financial crisis, the economy has proved to be resilient, with economic activity in the December 2021 quarter 3.5% ahead of pre-pandemic levels. Unemployment at 3.2% is at record lows. Household incomes have continued to rise and balance sheets are strong across almost every sector. We have done this with some of the lowest debt in the world. Our net debt is forecast to be around 1/2 of Australia's, 1/4 of the UK's and 1/5 of the USA's using a comparable measure. As I've indicated, we are moving to a new debt indicator that is more in line with how other countries measure their net debt and more accurately reflects the government's fiscal position. On that indicator, net debt will now peak at 19.9% of GDP, or 41% using the old indicator, before reducing further over the forecast period. Economic growth is forecast to peak at 4.2% and average 2.1% across the forecast period. We're forecast to reach an operating balance before gains or losses, the Obergale surplus, in the 2024-25 financial year. This will be 5 years after COVID hit us and is a year earlier than the previous government returned to surplus after the global financial crisis. New fiscal rules will oblige the government to run a small surplus on average over time once we have returned to surplus and maintain net debt at a ceiling of below 30% of GDP. This approach means that current expenses will be met from current revenue. We will have a prudent level of debt that allows for a buffer against future shocks while providing room for high quality and much needed investment to close our infrastructure deficit. Mr Speaker, this balanced approach to fiscal policy is critical as we face the immediate challenges that are in front of us and as we address the long-term issues in our economy. The impacts of COVID-19 remain with us. Experiences of the pandemic differ greatly among New Zealanders, and its long-term effects have yet to be seen. Long-standing challenges around climate change, child poverty, productivity, and housing quality and affordability have not lost their urgency. On top of that, Budget 2022 has been delivered in a difficult time for the global economy and for many New Zealanders. The impacts of rising inflation due to COVID, supply chain challenges, and pressure on oil prices from the Russian invasion of Ukraine are being felt at the petrol pump and at the supermarket. This budget responds to these immediate challenges facing New Zealanders while also looking ahead. The here and now matters, but so too does tomorrow, and making sure that we provide for a secure future. This budget is about both. A careful balance to provide economic security into the future and make sure we invest for what is needed now without adding to the drivers of inflation. Mr Speaker, I'll talk more about our long-term initiatives shortly, but first I want to focus on our immediate challenges. I'm acutely aware of the cost of living pressures that exist for many people, particularly those on low and middle incomes. While the current levels of inflation are expected to be temporary, this doesn't take away from the impact it is having on households and businesses. New Zealanders are not alone in feeling these pressures. Recently, the US has recorded inflation of 8.5%, Canada 6.7%, Germany 7.3%, and as of last night, the UK 9%. The very latest OECD average was an inflation of 8.8% in March, putting New Zealand about the middle of the pack. Such international comparisons, however, do not diminish the impact on New Zealanders who are currently struggling to deal with rising costs. Mr. Speaker, the government throughout COVID has supported households and businesses. More than $20 billion was provided in across-the-board support from the wage subsidy scheme, resurgent support and COVID support payments. This has kept many people in work. 62% of all jobs were supported in 2020 by the wage subsidy scheme and 47% in 2021. In response to the rapid spike in global oil prices following the war in Ukraine, we moved quickly in March to reduce the fuel excise by 25 cents a litre. For a family that fills up an average car every week, that represents up to $17 per tank or more than $220 worth of support over the 3 months. Road user charges were similarly reduced and public transport prices halved for the same period. These measures were on top of changes that we made to increase income support for low and middle income families from 1 April this year, including a third lift in weekly main benefit rates following those in 2020 and 2021. The changes that we have made since coming into government mean that 364,000 people who receive income support are better off by an average of $109 per week. For those with children, they are better off by an average of $175 per week. As we move through these next few months, further targeted support is being provided for low and middle income New Zealanders. The resumption of the winter energy payment from the 1st of May is providing this for superannuitants and those on income support, with at least $80 per month from the beginning of May until the end of September. But the increasing cost of living is affecting those on middle incomes as well. To provide targeted support to a wider group through this budget, the government is investing more than $1 billion in a cost of living package targeted at low and middle income households. The package includes an extension to the reduction of fuel excise duty introduced in March by 2 months until mid-August, an extension of the road user charges cuts introduced in April until mid-September, and an extension of half-price public transport fares introduced on 1 April until the end of August. I can also announce today that from September, we will introduce Community Connect to extend half-price public transport to the more than 1 million community services card holders on a permanent basis. Mr. Speaker, in addition to helping reduce costs for households, the public transport price cuts will also further our climate change and emission reduction objectives. We will also provide short-term targeted support to low and middle income New Zealanders through a $350 cost of living payment across 3 monthly instalments from August 1. This works out to about $27 per week for an estimated 2.1 million New Zealanders. Mr. Speaker, this payment will be available to people aged 18 and over who earn below $70,000 per annum based on last year's tax data and who are not eligible for the winter energy payment. We are well aware that this is only a contribution to the increased costs that people are facing, but it is a targeted way that we can support people through this challenging period while not excessively exacerbating inflation. The payment has been set at half of the couple rate of the winter energy payment and is a recognition of the impact of inflation on a wider group of New Zealanders than those currently eligible for the winter energy payment. As a result of both the winter energy payment and the cost of living payment, 81% of working age New Zealanders are being given temporary support to deal with cost of living pressures. Mr. Speaker, the budget provides further important changes that will support those on low incomes. Budget 2022 will change how sole parent beneficiaries receive child support payments. These payments will be directly passed on as income to sole parents receiving benefits from 2023, giving them more money to help their families and whānau. This change is estimated to lift between 6,000 and 14,000 children out of poverty. Mr. Speaker, we are also delivering on a manifesto commitment by more than trebling the level of dental grants available to low-income earners to $1,000 per annum. Criteria changes will ensure that these grants can be used for multiple visits for immediate and essential care. Mr. Speaker, while much of the inflation being experienced in New Zealand is driven by forces beyond our shores, we are also focused on addressing the supply constraints and other underlying issues that fuel it. This includes increasing labour supply through our immigration rebalance and reducing our reliance on volatile commodities like oil by decarbonising our transport fleet through initiatives like the Clean Car Discount. We are also committed to boosting competition in New Zealand's grocery sector to ensure people pay fair prices for food and other basics. Today, we are introducing legislation that will remove barriers to new retailers entering the market. Specifically, this will prohibit the restrictive covenants on land that major grocery retailers use to limit site availability for competitors. Such covenants will be prohibited immediately once the bill comes into effect, and I anticipate that competitors can begin to consider new sites shortly thereafter. Mr. Speaker, there are other measures the government will take in response to the Commerce Commission's recommendations, but this is one thing that can be done relatively simply and quickly. Overall, the cost of living package in Budget 2022 represents a targeted response to the pressures being faced by low and middle income households and provides support without making the cause of the problem worse. Mr. Speaker, moving to our longer term challenges and opportunities. Budget 2022 marks an historic milestone in tackling climate change. Climate change is the most pressing long-term challenge we face. It will have a significant impact on New Zealanders' living standards in the coming years, impacting the natural environment, our health, and our economic, social, and cultural well-being. Recent reports that have highlighted worsening predictions for sea level rise remind us again that we must act now for the sake of future generations. The action required also presents opportunities to increase our economic security as we develop new low-emissions industries and the knowledge and skills needed to transition to a high-wage, low-emissions economy. New Zealand's reputation in the world and the brand on which we trade is tied to the action we take on environmental issues, including climate change. Mr. Speaker, mitigating and adapting to climate change requires a sustainable, forward-looking response and significant investments across multiple budgets. To address this, we have established the Climate Emergency Response Fund with an initial $4.5 billion down payment from the expected cash proceeds from the emissions trading scheme. For Budget 2022, investments are focused on mitigation, particularly initiatives to deliver actions in the emissions reductions plan. In future, the criteria will be extended to include adaptation. As announced earlier this week, the SURF investments for Budget 2022 total $2.9 billion and include a strong focus on transport. These include $569 million to support low-income households to shift to low-emission alternatives when scrapping a vehicle, and $375 million to reduce reliance on cars and support the uptake of active and shared transport modes. There are also significant climate-focused energy and industry investments, including $653 million to fund further decarbonisation, including increasing the scope of the government investing in Decarbonising Industry Fund to support businesses to shift to low energy sources, and $73 million to deliver more insulation and heating retrofits for low-income owners by extending the Warmer Kiwi Homes program. In the agriculture sector, climate investments include $339 million of funding for a Centre for Climate Action in Agriculture to support innovation and research to reduce emissions, and $6 million for the implementation of an agriculture emissions pricing scheme based on the outcomes of the primary sector Climate Action Partnership He Waka Eke Noa. In the forestry sector, $91 million is allocated to reduce the use of coal and other carbon-intensive fuels and materials by increasing woody biomass availability, and $145 million to create large-scale native forests as carbon sinks to offset emissions in other sectors where abatement is difficult. Mr Speaker, the Government's emissions reductions plan will help us meet the carbon budgets set by the Climate Commission. They are achievable but will require all sectors to play their part. They will also require sustained investment. Treasury has updated its forecast for ETS cash proceeds by $800 million, and the Government has agreed to use this increase to top up the fund, leaving $1.5 billion remaining. We will review the size of the fund on a regular basis, with the next opportunity being the half-year economic and fiscal update in December. The climate investments that we've announced in Budget 2022 are funded by those who pollute, not from increasing debt or other revenue. They will see the Government, in partnership with business, do the initial heavy lifting in our climate response, and in doing so, give households greater choice about how they participate in climate action. I would like to acknowledge our cooperation agreement partners, the Green Party, and in particular the Honourable James Shaw for his role across 2 terms of government in bringing this work together. It is no longer good enough just to talk the talk on climate action. At Budget 2022, we walk the walk, or take public transport or another sustainable mode of transport. A dad joke from Minister Shaw. Mr Speaker, COVID-19 has highlighted the need to reform New Zealand's health system and ensure we are delivering quality services nationwide in an equitable and sustainable way. Our health system is staffed by dedicated and talented health professionals, but the system in which they are working is fragmented, inefficient, and financially unsustainable. For too long, New Zealanders' access to health services has been a postcode lottery. For decades, we have seen inequalities grow in the health outcomes for Māori and Pacific peoples. Today, that changes. Budget 2022 provides the largest investment ever in our health system, with $11.1 billion in new funding to put that system on a sustainable financial footing. This will ensure that Health New Zealand and the Māori Health Authority are able to make the changes needed to deliver better health services for New Zealanders wherever they live. To set the system up for success, we need to change the way that we provide funding for health. In recent years, district health boards have consistently run deficits, with funding unable to meet growing demand and address historic cost pressures. Relying on the annual budget cycle for funding has made it difficult to plan for future investments and address long-term challenges in the health system. To address this, we are introducing a new multi-year funding model for health, beginning with 2 years of funding before eventually moving toward a 3-year funding cycle from Budget 2024. The 2-year transitional package agreed through Budget 22 begins with an investment of $1.8 billion per annum, including funding to deal with the deficits of the previous system, and this will be followed by a further $1.3 billion per annum from 2023. Unlike in previous budgets, where cost pressures for specific services have had to be traded off against one another, delayed or partly funded, this general increase will allow Health New Zealand to take a central view and identify the priorities for funding across the system. Mr Speaker, the transformation of our health system will take time, but these first investments will make significant progress towards a fully equitable, sustainable and quality health system for the future. Within the funding allocated in Budget 2022, there is $488 million for primary and community care. This will roll out local models of care that are tailored to the populations they serve, as well as securing and developing the capacity and capability of Māori and Pacific healthcare providers. Mr Speaker, the investments for Māori healthcare providers contribute to a wider package of initiatives totalling $580 million across the health, social and justice sectors, which contribute to Māori health and wellbeing. This includes $166 million for whānau ora providers to continue supporting more than 40,000 whānau. Mr Speaker, the budget will also make the largest ever single contribution to Pharmac's medicines budget. We are investing $191 million over the next 2 years to make more medicines and other health treatments available. The 2-year funding will align Pharmac with the new overall multi-year health funding allocation. Pharmac's total funding will be $1.2 billion, which is up 43% since we took office in 2017. There is significant support in Budget 2022 to secure the future of our ambulance services. $166 million over 4 years provides funding to add 48 more ambulances and 13 other vehicles to New Zealand's road ambulance fleet and allow up to 248 more paramedics and frontline staff to be recruited. $90.7 million over 4 years will go towards New Zealand's air ambulance services. This includes the replacement of some ageing aircraft with modern fit-for-purpose helicopters and at least one new helicopter with additional crew. Mr. Speaker, Budget 2022 allocates $202 million to further improve New Zealanders' access to mental health and addiction services. This budget focuses on improving care for those who have the highest needs. We're investing $100 million to increase the availability of specialist mental health and addiction services and strengthen existing services in targeted areas across the country. We're also continuing to invest in 2 programs that support young people's mental health. Mana Ake, which provides mental wellbeing support for primary and intermediate school age students, and Piki, a pilot scheme which provides integrated mental health and addiction support for young people. We're also continuing our significant investment in hospitals and other health infrastructure with an injection of a further $1.3 billion. This will include a further investment for the rebuild of Whangarei Hospital and the initial works to redevelop Nelson Hospital. This takes total health capital investment since Budget 2018 to more than $6.9 billion. Mr. Speaker, in every budget, there are always smaller projects that might get lost on the day, but are very meaningful. To highlight just one example, this year we're providing $7 million of funding for the operation of portable retinal cameras to ensure equitable access for screening premature babies to address one of the leading causes of blindness. In total, Mr. Speaker, around a third of Budget 2022 investments are for health. This speaks to our priorities as a government. Our vision is for all New Zealanders, no matter where they live or who they are, to have access to high quality health services to support the best quality of life. I am proud to say that this budget is a significant step towards making this vision a reality. Mr. Speaker, in response to COVID-19, we went hard and we went early, an approach that has paid huge dividends. Key to this success was the establishment of the COVID-19 Response and Recovery Fund. This fund has allowed us to invest in crucial response functions and targeted supports that enable New Zealanders to weather and recover from the economic impacts of COVID-19. As our policy response to the pandemic evolves and we adjust to living with COVID-19, our fiscal response is evolving as well. Our COVID-19 response is increasingly part of standard public service delivery, so we no longer expect to need the funding flexibility that was essential early on. As a result, we have closed the COVID-19 Response and Recovery Fund. We are reprioritising the remaining funding and bringing future COVID-19 related costs within standard budget processes. We continue to have fiscal headroom to respond as necessary in the event of a major resurgence or a new variant. We're taking a prudent approach to that possibility by setting aside $1.2 billion so we can respond rapidly to any immediate public health needs related to COVID-19 that cannot wait until Budget 2023. Mr. Speaker, the uncertain and volatile global economic situation highlights the need for an economic plan that supports diversification of the New Zealand economy, creates new products and services, and increases our resilience in an uncertain world. Our economic plan is to build a high-wage, low-emissions economy that provides economic security in good times and in bad. This budget includes a substantial package to unleash the potential in our economy. We are funding the ongoing development of industry transformation plans. ITPs bring industry players together to increase productivity and resilience. Budget 2022 invests $37 million for the construction sector accord transformation plan to increase the productivity, capability and resilience of our construction sector. $30 million for the Advanced Manufacturing ITP. This plan focuses on identifying existing and emerging points of comparative advantage, maximising our global brand and international connections. An additional $5 million for the Agritech ITP to build the skills and practices required to transform the sector into a sustainable and competitive export industry. And $20 million for the Digital ITP to grow the software as a service sector and ensure that we grow the skills and talent we need to create more high-wage jobs. Mr. Speaker, the budget also recognises the importance of the tourism sector to rebuild in a sustainable way. An innovation program for tourism is being created by reprioritising funding not required from earlier emergency support. It will be designed with the sector to ensure it targets investment to where we can truly innovate and develop our tourism offering. Mr. Speaker, small businesses are a key component in the transition to a high-wage, low-emissions economy. We are setting aside $100 million of capital funding for a business growth fund being developed alongside New Zealand's major banks. This will improve SMEs' access to finance, enabling them to grow, create jobs and increase their contribution to our wider economic development. Mr. Speaker, we know that when our regions do well, all of New Zealand benefits. To help the people, businesses and industries based in the regions reach their full potential, we are fully funding the $200 million Regional Strategic Partnership Fund to invest in local projects tailored to a region's particular needs and advantages. And to further help those in the regions, we are fulfilling another manifesto commitment by investing $60 million to improve broadband infrastructure in the worst served areas, enabling stronger connections and greater productivity. Mr. Speaker, this government is focused on delivering better infrastructure, and that is a key component of our vision for a high-wage, low-emissions economy. Our first 30-year New Zealand infrastructure strategy from Tahua, the New Zealand Infrastructure Commission, shows that if we continue on the path of the past 4 decades, we will not be able to meet our future infrastructure needs. Underinvestment in our crucial infrastructure is one of New Zealand's greatest long-term economic challenges. We have dedicated more than $60 billion to infrastructure over the next 5 years, but that alone is not enough. We need to be smarter about the way we plan, deliver and use our infrastructure, and this will mean getting more from the infrastructure we do build, reducing costs and prioritising for the greatest impact. Te Wāhinga's strategy will be a key enabler of many of the government's priorities, tackling the housing crisis, responding to climate change and building a more secure economy. Mr. Speaker, Budget 2022's new investments in infrastructure include $349 million of capital funding to replace and modernise our rail assets and the $1.3 billion to upgrade our health infrastructure to support current and future demand. In total, Budget 2022 includes $4.7 billion of capital investments from the $9.8 billion multi-year capital allowance. Budget 2022 also has a strong focus on transitioning to a digital economy, improving how we deliver public services and keeping our existing digital services safe from cybersecurity risks. Key investments include setting aside funding for a new digital system for our courts, making it easier for New Zealanders to interact with the justice system. $220 million of operating and $100 million of capital spending set aside for investments in health system, data and digital infrastructure and capability, and an investment in critical satellite capability to improve the accuracy of GPS. Mr. Speaker, the government is committed to delivering quality education, training and skills development so that all New Zealanders get the opportunities they need to live the lives they value. The Budget 2022 package includes a total of $2 billion in operating funding and $855 million of capital for the education system, including investments in infrastructure, new initiatives and funding to address critical cost pressures. The newly developed Equity Index will receive $293 million operating and $8 million capital funding to replace the outdated decile system and significantly increase equity funding to schools. As part of the government's commitment to strengthening the role of Te Reo Māori in our education system, Budget 2022 provides $75 million to support providers of Te Reo Māori, immersion and kaupapa Māori learning throughout our education system. And as demand for Māori language education grows, we are investing $21 million operating and $105 million capital investment to provide quality classrooms for our kura. Investing in quality education means not only investing in students, but also those who support them. Budget 2022 builds on the investment made in the past two budgets by providing $275 million towards progressing pay parity in our early childhood education sector. Mr. Speaker, the government's investment in supporting employment opportunities for New Zealanders has been crucial to the COVID-19 response and recovery and has supported the record low unemployment rate. We are providing further funding for successful programs like Mana in Mahi, which provides significant support to people furthest from the labour market to upskill and enter employment. We're also extending the Apprenticeship Boost initiative, supporting firms to keep early stage apprentices employed and bring on new apprentices and strengthen the skilled workforces New Zealand needs to recover from the impacts of COVID-19. More than 190,000 Kiwis have been supported through our investments in trade training since the start of COVID, and 38,000 apprentices are expected to benefit from the extension of the Apprenticeship Boost through to the end of 2023. Mr. Speaker, Budget 2022 also sets aside $60 million to support progress on the continued design and implementation of the New Zealand Income Insurance Scheme. This scheme has been jointly designed with Business New Zealand and the Council of Trade Unions to better support New Zealanders who lose their jobs through no fault of their own. The scheme will better protect workers and incomes and also increase the availability of skilled workers. It will help communities and industries during economic shocks and contributing to a more secure economy. And it is now expected to be operational in 2024. Mr. Speaker, Budget 2022 includes over $1 billion in investments to support better Māori health, education and economic outcomes, as well as stronger cultural wellbeing. We are continuing to foster employment opportunities for Māori through the continuation of the cadetship program and support for Māori entities delivering employment training through the Māori Trades and Training Fund. We're laying foundations to support Māori economic development, with $10 million for the Te Ringa Hapai Whenua Infrastructure Fund, which will enable owners to undertake economic, cultural, social and environmental projects on their whenua. Our continued support for the Progressive Procurement Program, with an additional $26 million, will help to build capability for Māori businesses to effectively participate in public sector procurement processes and increase supplier diversity. Mr. Speaker, building capability and employment opportunities is also key to our investment in Pacific peoples, with $18 million for Pacific STEAM Futures and $8 million for delivering employment and training services through Tupu Aotearoa. We remain committed to protecting and uplifting Māori and Pacific culture, knowledge and history. Budget 2022 supports the growth and development of the Māori media sector and provides funding to protect Mātauranga Māori and other taonga. We are also following through on the commitment made to empower Pacific communities to tell their stories of the Dawn Raids, making progress towards reconciliation through community grants for multimedia projects and online histories platform, and creating an official historical account. Mr. Speaker, as a government, we are committed to taking substantial action to reduce child poverty and hardship in New Zealand beyond the 66,500 children already lifted out of poverty. While our targets are ambitious, the latest figures for 2021 are encouraging. They show rates on all 9 income and material hardship measures in the Child Poverty Reduction Act are trending downwards. And we have achieved 2 out of 3 of our first 3-year targets and made significant reductions against the third target. Through Budget 2022, we are continuing to support families through direct and indirect investments in child poverty and wellbeing. This budget also has a strong focus on providing more equitable access to services and improving wellbeing outcomes for New Zealanders who live with disabilities. A $943 million package will enable disability system providers to meet demand, establish a new ministry for disabled people, and invest in the regional-based rollout of the Enabling Good Lives approach to disability support services. Mr. Speaker, Budget 2022 also includes $1.5 billion of investment in public, transitional and emergency housing, as part of the government's continuing efforts to address challenges to housing access and affordability. This adds to the 9,000 extra public housing places already delivered under this government. This funding includes $1 billion for public and transitional housing, $355 million for changes to the emergency housing system, $75 million to progress the Homelessness Action Plan, and $221 million for the Affordable Housing Fund. Targeted support for first home buyers through the budget include increases to the first home grant caps, which will help more Kiwi families get the security of home ownership as prices become more sustainable against a backdrop of record house building in this country. Mr. Speaker, Budget 2022 continues to embed a wellbeing approach into the budget process and the wider public finance system. The innovations introduced as part of Budget 2022 will allow us to better address complex, multi-generational challenges and facilitate longer-term investment. These changes include a multi-year funding cycle for health services and establishing the multi-year Climate Emergency Response Fund, as well as a pilot of 2 clusters of agencies in the justice and natural resources sectors. Key to all these innovations is a focus on driving delivery and value for money. The clusters help break down silos between agencies and also help ministers to collectively make trade-offs across related areas. 3 years of funding gives agencies the certainty to plan ahead with a focus on achieving longer-term outcomes and managing cost fluctuations. Ministers and agencies have worked together to develop a funding package based on 4 priorities for a more effective overall justice system. Key Justice Cluster investments include $46 million to develop a cross-sector model to guide future investment in services for victims and increasing the uptake of financial grants under the Victim Assistance Scheme, and $190 million to maintain and strengthen legal aid to ensure access to justice for people who cannot afford a lawyer. Budget 2022 also invests in solutions to prevent harm from crime in communities and improve the safety of our frontline workers. This includes $92 million of operating and $2 million capital funding for effective implementation of the government's end-to-end strategy to prevent harm from serious and organised crime in New Zealand. Reforming the resource management system to deliver better outcomes for our natural and urban environments is a priority for this government. It is a key focus of the Natural Resources Cluster, with $179 million to support the successful implementation of these reforms. Other key natural resources investments include $18 million operating and $5 million capital funding for a permanent network of advisory services to support more sustainable and productive use of rural land, and $40 million total operating to progress industry transformation plans for our primary sectors, including fisheries, forestry, and the food and beverage sectors. Mr. Speaker, Budget 2022 comes at a time when the global economy is uncertain and volatile. Our response to that requires a careful balance. Faced with the current elevated levels of global inflation, some would have us pull back on supporting New Zealanders with the public services that they need. But that will not reduce the prices that Kiwis are facing at the pump or in the supermarket. It will only undermine the well-being and security of our people, and it is not an option I am prepared to consider. Instead, this budget backs New Zealanders in shaping the new normal that is life with COVID. It builds on the collective hard work that has delivered a strong economic base to meet core needs across health, education and housing, while also supporting climate action and investing in the skills, infrastructure and industries we need to grow higher paying jobs. We are providing support in the here and now for those facing cost of living pressures, while carefully managing our spending and keeping debt under control. This budget represents a major step towards a future where we provide economic security to all New Zealanders while delivering higher wage jobs that support a low emissions economy. Mr. Speaker, Aotearoa New Zealand has navigated COVID better than almost any country in the world. We did that by putting our people first, by taking a well-being approach and by targeting our support where it was needed the most. We will now take the success of that approach and build on that foundation to overcome the challenges we face and seize the opportunities for a secure future for all New Zealanders. Mr. Speaker, I commend Budget 2022, A Secure Future, to the House.
Order. Order. The question is that the motion be agreed to. The Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, I move that all the words after that be replaced with "this House and the people of New Zealand have lost confidence in this government because this budget takes them backwards. The books are going backwards, households are going backwards, outcomes are going backwards, New Zealand is going backwards." And Mr. Speaker, Grant Robertson had one task in this budget, and that was to ruthlessly focus everything in this budget around overcoming the cost of living crisis and to stop New Zealanders going backwards. But it's clear that he's failed because Grant Robertson has delivered the backwards budget. Now I have to say, we had a moment. We thought about calling it the budget blowout budget. Then we thought about maybe it's just the Band-Aid budget, but we landed on the backwards budget. Because when you cut through all the words and you strip out all the spin and you look at the facts of it, the sad news for New Zealanders is that Kiwis are going backwards, the books are going backwards, and the outcomes are going backwards. Now, Mr. Speaker, the sad part of this budget is that the reality is that Kiwi families and Kiwi households are going backwards. They're being squeezed by this massive cost of living crisis. And I want New Zealanders to get really clear about where we are and what's happening with this cost of living crisis, because inflation is at a 30-year high. It's higher than most of our trading partners, despite what Jacinda Ardern and Grant Robertson will tell us, and it's actually getting a grip in this economy. Now, some people like David Parker are students of economic history, and if you go back to New Zealand in the early 80s, we remember interest rates being at 20%. We were in double-digit inflation. You look around the world and inflation destroys economies. And once it gets in, it's hard to get out, and it causes hurt and pain to people everywhere. We've got inflation now at just under 7%. We've got wage growth only at 3%, and that means all Kiwis are going back faster than they've been going in the last 3 decades. Mortgage costs are up because interest rates are up. Rents are up $150. Food prices up, the highest it's been in over a decade. And petrol is up over $3 a litre. And I can tell you, Kiwis up and down this country are feeling that pain. And this budget will be putting Kiwis backwards into the future. The budget forecasts that inflation isn't actually due to come down below 3% until 2025.
Back to this special broadcast, Tahua Pūtea rua mano, rua tekau ma rua. Minister of Finance Grant Robertson has just delivered his 4th wellbeing budget, which has some significant changes for Māori. We'll get into that very shortly. As he has now completed the budget statement, there is now a general debate on the budget, starting with the Leader of the Opposition, Christopher Luxon, as you can see there. Let's take a quick look at what has come from the budget 2022, and it was announced this afternoon that there is more than $200 million has been allocated for Māori education. Māori employment and economy will receive $155 million. Māori broadcasting over the next 2 years will receive an injection of $41 million. The Māori Health Authority for direct commissioning of services is set to receive $168 million. And there is also support for iwi Māori Partnership Board, who will receive $20.1 million. Māori primary and community care providers will be supported with a $30 million injection. And also the Māori Health Workforce Development will receive $39 million. There's also been a boost for Māori economic and employment initiatives, including more funding for Māori health and wellbeing initiatives as well. Further support towards growing language, culture and identity initiatives to deliver on the government's commitment to te reo Māori in education. There's also funding for natural environment and climate change initiatives to help farmers, growers and whenua Māori owners reduce their agricultural emissions, a total of more than $1 billion towards Māori initiatives. There's more support for the government treaty partners in building their data collection and analysis capability for and with iwi, hapu and Māori. The government has also recognised that the leading role for Māori is that of hapu and iwi, who play a significant role in bringing Māori culture to New Zealanders. $18 million has been set aside to celebrate Te Ao Māori and preserve our taonga. Budget 2022 includes investment in Matariki celebrations, our first public holiday with a Te Ao Māori focus. This funding will support Matariki celebrations led by iwi, hapu, whānau and communities who will develop and host events at local, regional and national levels. The government will also boost funding for Te Matatini through the Culture Sector Workforce Capability Initiative, so delivery can be made for Te Matatini Herenga Waka Herenga Tangata Kapahaka Festival and have space to plan for the future to develop a regional kapahaka model. Child support rules to be reformed, lifting an estimated 6,000 to 14,000 children out of poverty. There's also support for immediate and essential dental care, lifted from $300 to $1,000 per year. Increased income levels for hardship assistance to extend eligibility. And most important of all, $1 billion for cost of living package has been delivered, giving a $350 cash payment to more than 2.1 million New Zealanders. So some significant improvements and outcomes from this Wellbeing Budget 2022 for Māori. Well, e te iwi, that wraps up our live broadcast of the budget statement for this year. We hope that you have a better understanding and insight into the wellbeing budget and how it will affect you and your whānau in the time ahead. Stay tuned to MFM right across our on-air and online platforms as we bring you more detailed information and a breakdown of the budget 2022 over the coming days. Thank you for your company. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. Stay safe. Take care. Ki te kotahi te waihoe, ka ora te iwi.